Now we're going to take a look at something called DoCblocks. So now this doesn't specifically relate to object-oriented programming. However, what it does do is it allows you to document your code so that both you and other people can better understand what your methods and your classes and your variables do. And this is just a widely accepted form of documenting your classes. So you need to do it. So we're going to take a look at working with that right now. Okay, so I have two files, an index.php and a math.php class that we're going to create. So let's go ahead and get started. Whoops, at the very top, we're going to create, first let's go ahead and include math.php. And now let's create C equals a new instance of this math class. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and create it. And we'll say class math. And now I'm going to create one function, and this is just going to be pretty much a gibberish function, do something. Let's make it accept a parameter, and all we're simply going to do is echo out doing, and then we will concatenate whatever the user types. So if they write the dishes, it's going to echo out doing the dishes. Okay, stupid, I know. So let's say we instantiate the class as we've done here, and now we want to access its methods that are available to us. You can see here, it does bring that up, and it does bring up the name, but as you can see here, PHP doc, same thing as DoCblocks, is not found. We have no idea how many variables this accepts. We have no idea what this method actually does. We don't know if it returns anything. So in this case, when we're working on it right now, it's not a big deal, but especially if maybe you're working with somebody else's class or even your own a year down the road, you're not going to remember. So that's when DoCblocks become vital. So let's go ahead and revise this just a bit. Right here, we can specify DoCblocks by doing / ***, so followed by 2 stars. Now, most IDEs will kind of do an autofill for you, but if not, it's pretty simple, just / ***, and then each new line gets its own star. So you can see here, in my case, NetBeans is smart enough to realize that it accepts a parameter, so it knows to include that for me. So for example, if I were to change this to a return statement, which would be better for an actual method, and I hit enter, now it knows that there's a return statement. So always use an IDE that's smart enough to know what you're doing. However, in this case, we're still going to echo it out. So the first thing we need to do here is take a look at these little @ symbols. So this is a way to document, think of them as little specific DocBlock variables. So in this case, @param refers to a parameter that your method will accept. So here we have one parameter. So it wants to know first param and then what type. Okay, so it's going to accept, in our case, a string. And now it wants to know the variable name, stuff. And then finally we end that with a quick description. So what you're doing. Okay, so let's save that, and now if we come back and we try it again, do something, now it's been updated with these parameters, and now I know, okay, well I can call do something and it's going to accept one parameter, that's a string, and it just wants to know what am I doing. Okay, so now I can do that. Whoops, excuse me. Do something, the dishes. So now I'm going to view this, run this in the browser, and now we get doing the dishes. So isn't that very helpful, especially when you get to much more complicated methods? But we can take this further. So if, let's say, we accept 2, stuff 2, in this case, no matter how many variables you'd have, you would want to do this again. Sorry about that. And we'll do param, and once again, this is going to be a string, stuff 2, more of what you're doing, or whatever, you know. So if we come back, now we will come and see that it accepts 2 parameters now. Okay, very helpful. So let's go back and flesh out our actual class here at the very top. What it wants to know right now is we can add some information about the author of the class, the copyright, any license, any specific variables. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And I'm going to set the author of it. It's going to, of course, be me. And let's go ahead and do the description. My description of this class goes here. Or better yet, why don't we go ahead and this class simply does some simple math operations for a demo. Okay, that'll be fine for our little class here. Now let's go ahead and add the author. We want to know first we use @author and then my name, followed by my email if I want to do that. Okay, next we can add another one. Let's do copyright. If there's any copyright associated with it, I'm going to keep it very simple here, 2010. And finally, if there's any license that comes with it, I can include a path to the license file, followed by whatever it's called, GPL, MIT, whatever. Okay, and that will be just fine for this information. So that lets whoever's using your class know exactly what they're working with. So now let's go ahead and flesh out a little bit more. If we're going to be working with variables, let's say we have up here a public, public bar, something like that, we can go ahead and document this as well. And you can see here, it's smart enough to know that this is a variable, so it does @var, and it wants to know what type. I don't know, let's say it's an integer. And I can say this number starts whatever it's for, okay? And you can do that for every single variable. So I know you might think this muddies up your code, but it's really important, especially if you're creating classes that other people can use, maybe for GitHub. Okay, so now let's come back down and take a look at some of the other things that we have available to us. Let's come down here, and remember earlier I noted that if I was returning a statement, we need to let the user know. So, @return, and we can do anything we want here. All it wants to know is the type, so it's going to return a string, and whatever typed in will be returned. Just gibberish, but let's go ahead and check that out again. Do something, and now C, do something, and now it knows that it's going to return a value, and what's it going to return? Whatever you typed in will be returned. Okay, very cool. So now let's do more of a real-world function. Let's go get rid of all of this, and if this is a math class, let's go ahead and do kind of the staple add. So we're going to create a method where the user can type in as many numbers as they want, and we will simply take all those numbers and add them together. Okay, so function add, and let's go ahead and write this method really quickly. I'm going to do this off the top of my head. So args, there's a helpful PHP method called func_num args. So what this is helpful is when you have no idea how many arguments the user is going to pass in, this will return however many. So in this case, let's say I did C add, and we did 5, 10, 15, 20. In this case, this method will return the exact number of arguments passed, in this case 4. So that's helpful because now we can filter over those without having to specify without having to specify a certain number of arguments. Let's also go ahead and create another variable, sum. This is going to be the variable that will contain the total. And finally, I'm going to create a I. This is just for iteration. So it's kind of comes from a JavaScript world. Declaring all your variables at the top is generally a good practice. Okay, so let's continue on. And now all I'm going to do here is filter through the number of arguments. So I'm going to say for I, and as long as I is less than args, in this case, as long as I is less than 4, because we've only passed in 4 arguments, then I++. Okay, so what I need to do here is simply add the current item, or the current value of the argument, to this value of sum. So sum would first be added 10, would be 5, and then, and then we'd add 10, and then we'd add 15, and then 20 to it. But there is one problem. We can't assume that the user is going to type in an integer. What if they were to type 5? Okay, so what PHP will actually do is it'll just skip that, but why don't we do a little bit of error checking and just ensure that the user is typing in an integer. So let's go in here and we can say, let's use a ternary operator, and we're going to say if it is an integer. Now the method that we can use, very similar to func_num arguments, is func get arg, and this will get an argument. All you need to do is pass it an index and it'll return the value of that specific argument index. So here I'm just simply going to do I. Okay, so I'm saying if it is an integer, so func get arguments, in this first case I will be equal to 0. So it's going to go and find, okay, what is the value of the very first 0 base, the very first item? 5. So this will be equal to 5. And we're saying if 5 is an integer, then let's go ahead and add that number to this sum variable. And then we'll say sum plus equals func get arg I. Now, what if it is not an integer, if it's a string? Well, we can either skip it, or maybe we should let the user know, you know what, you've entered something that's not an integer here, so let's just go ahead and stop. And we'll die and say use only integers, please. Okay, and that should be fine. Let me look over this really quickly. And that should do it. Just forgot one parentheses. So if it is an integer, let's go ahead and add that to this sum variable that we created above. Otherwise, let's just go ahead and die. So let's come here and once again change this to 5 and run the file in the browser. There we go. Use only integers, please. So now let's go ahead and change that. And we know if we did this right, it should be, what, 15, 20, 30, 50? And of course, we have one more problem here, is we're going through these operations, but we need to return it, because right now we've added this sum variable, but we never did anything with the sum variable, right? So, of course, return sum. And of course, because it's being returned, we need to go ahead and either store this in a value like solution, or let's just go ahead and echo it out for this example. And of course, we get 50 as we thought. So this is really helpful, because now we can add 50, that brings it to 100, and another 100 that should bring it to 200. Pretty helpful little method. Who knows if you'd ever use it. But now let's come back and let's go ahead and document this as best as we can. Okay, so at the very top, I'm going to say it's going to return an integer, the sum of all the arguments. And that should be just fine. So if you want to do anything else there, you can add any params, but in this case we're not accepting any specific number of params, so that'll do just fine. And let's go ahead and test this out once again. Let's go ahead and we'll do C, add, and now we know, okay, we can make a note here that it adds any number of arguments, and then it's going to return the sum of all of those. So let's do that last bit right here. Add as many arguments as you wish, and this method will calculate the sum. Let's try it again. Add as many arguments, so you see how vital it is that you let your users of your class know exactly what's going on here. Pretty cool way of documenting your classes. Make sure you use it. Maybe if you're doing something small only for you, maybe it's not as vital, but for any bigger projects, make sure that you add some author information. If you create vars, make sure you document it that way. If there's a license, if there's params, make sure you learn up on this as best as possible. Okay, when you're ready, move on to the next video.